From the studios of Clean Fuels Alliance America, this is the Better, Cleaner, Now podcast. Fascinating ideas and conversations in the world of biodiesel, renewable diesel, and sustainable aviation fuel. Now, here's your host, Scott Tremaine.
Today, Clean Fuels Director of Environmental Science, Veronica Bradley, discusses climate change and the role of renewable energy technologies with Dr. Jenny Frank, NORA consultant and assistant professor at State University of New York at Morrisville.
Thanks, Scott. I'm really excited to dive into this topic for our listeners today. It's a topic near and dear to my heart. The urgency of our battle against climate change, where time is our most precious and dwindling resource. We talk a lot about 2030 and 2050 goals for reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but we neglect to emphasize why 2030 goals are just as, if not more important than 2050 goals, and why taking action today is so important, right? Every bit of carbon we add to the atmosphere today stays there and blankets the Earth. That's why the timing of this is so important. For every 5 years delay, we'll have to reduce emissions 13 times more to have the same climate impact. That's really what brought me to join the clean fuels industry. We can reduce our carbon footprint today, help fight climate change, and maintain our quality of life. It just makes scientific sense. And our guest today has dedicated her career to this research. Jenny, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Veronica, for having me. I'm happy to be here, and I'm excited to speak with you today.
So I gave a little peek into why I'm working in this space. What drew you to this line of work?
Yeah, so I always wanted to go into a field that I feel would make a big difference in our society when it comes to climate, when it comes to the environment. And I thought, where can I go and what can I do to really help us as a society as a whole? And so I really got interested in energy, specifically different types of renewable energy technologies and low carbon fuels as well. So I'm really happy to talk about my research, about what I do, and about my work at SUNY Morrisville as well as with NORA.
Yeah, I feel like energy, for me, it was the same thing, looking at ways that we can reduce our environmental impact and recognizing that humanity relies so much on energy. We use it for everything we do. I mean, we wouldn't be able to record this podcast today if it weren't for the energy driving all of our equipment. So really being able to make that difference in everyday life feels like the renewable energy space.
Yeah, and I agree with you 100%. It really touches every aspect of our society from, just living our everyday lives to talking, how I'm talking to you today, to driving, to flying. It's everywhere and it's everything we do. So I think it's really important.
Yeah, and of course, normally, historically, energy, we've relied on fossil fuels and petroleum products, and the carbon emissions that come from that are persistent and accumulate, leading to warmer temperatures over time, changing weather patterns, disrupting kind of the balance of nature, right? It poses so many risks to us, to all other life forms on Earth, our reliance on the natural environment, and kind of the ways that we kind of take advantage even of our natural environment, knowing the climates that we live in. But with increased carbon emissions, the climates that we live in are changing, right? So, what do we need to do? I mentioned, governments and corporations have these 2030 goals, but this is really all because the scientific consensus around climate change says that we have to peak annual global greenhouse gas emissions before 2025, which is insane, right?
Yes, just around the corner.
2024, right? I mean, I think of, I graduated undergrad in 2007 and was working in this space and wanted to, was studying this space, and you're like, oh, 2030 is so far away, or now it's, 2025, and oh my God, it's 2024.
Right. Yeah. And, that's why the urgency to act is so important, whether it's from a political sense, from an academic sense, from research and development. It's really important. And the time is now. It's really now or never.
Yeah.
That's what we're seeing in the research.
Right. And those scientists that say, peaking emissions before 25 also means reducing emissions by 43% by 2030, and then reaching that net zero emissions goal by 2050 to really avoid all those catastrophic impacts of climate change, like drought and intense weather events. And so, it's not just how much carbon getting to net zero that we talk about, but it's like, when are you going to be able to do that? Because the timing of it is so important.
Right.
And I know that your PhD, your dissertation focused on kind of the techno-economic analysis associated with that. So how do we get more benefits using different technologies like biodiesel or renewable diesel or SAF now versus the benefits that we get for waiting for other technologies to become more affordable and available. So can you explain a little bit about your research and what it found on that subject?
Yeah. Thank you, Veronica. A lot of my research, like Veronica said, focuses on techno-economic analysis, which is essentially looking at the technical, the financial, as well as the environmental impacts of different types of renewable energy systems, as well as different types of fuel systems. So in terms of my research, I have published many papers, one of which is called Quantifying the Comparative Value of Carbon Abatement Scenarios over Different Investment Timing Scenarios. So for this project, what we really wanted to do was understand that time value of carbon, understand what it means to transition over to biomass-based diesel fuels, transition over to battery electric vehicles as well for these Class 8 heavy-duty trucks. And what does this mean from a financial perspective? What does it mean from an environmental greenhouse gas emissions perspective?
I think this is such a practical set of research. Like so many times you read scientific articles and they're just kind of like, this is the way to mitigate climate change. This is what we need to do. But nobody's putting value, like financial value on it and how much it actually costs to do that transition. I think I am by no means an economist or someone who does the financial stuff, but I find like the TEA, the techno-economic analysis, is like the most valuable research that I always look at when we think about, how is a policymaker going to consider this? How is the average person going to consider making this? Especially in things like transportation, where someone has control over the vehicle that they own and buying a new vehicle, right?
Yeah. And I agree with you 100%. And I think it's so important as well because we're considering the impacts not just from a financial perspective, not just from environmental perspectives, but we're really tying together both of these perspectives and whether or not it is feasible for us to pursue different pathways in a certain amount of time. So we're considering the time value of carbon, we're considering the financial viability, as well as the greenhouse gas emissions, that environmental viability as well with research like this.
Yeah, so tell me more about what you found.
Yeah. So, it's a pretty lengthy study, but essentially what we did is we considered a petroleum-based diesel fuel pathway where we have a Class 8 heavy-duty truck operating solely on petroleum-based diesel fuel. We also consider different types of pathways that switch over. So pursuing petroleum-based diesel pathways for a certain amount of time, then transitioning over to a biomass-based diesel fuel scenario, and another pathway which transitions from that petroleum-based diesel scenario to a battery electric vehicle scenario. And remember, This is just for heavy-duty trucks, Class 8 vehicles.
Those semis, right?
Yeah. So we calculated the financial viability as a 20-year net present value.
Okay, so might need to take 1 second to explain net present value.
Yeah. So essentially, this is a method that allows us to understand whether or not different types of goods, services, energy systems, whatever it may be that you are considering, whether or not they are financially viable to pursue. So typically, if you have a positive net present value, that means that your good, your service, your system is financially viable. It tells the investors or the researchers to go ahead and keep going with that project or that investment, whatever they're looking to pursue.
So basically, like the benefits outweigh the costs.
Exactly.
In a different kind of context of methodology.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And if you have a net present value that is zero, that essentially means that you're breaking even. You're not gaining any type of financial benefit, but you're also not losing a financial benefit. So, the benefits don't outweigh the cost and the costs don't outweigh the benefits when your net present value is essentially zero. Mm-hmm. So you're breaking even.
Yeah.
And if your net present value is negative, that means that the costs of pursuing or of creating whatever you're considering, the costs significantly outweigh those benefits. So it tells us to stop what you're doing and really not go ahead. Do not proceed, essentially.
So like in a different scenario that I think a lot of people probably might have considered is like transitioning from your regular light bulb to the super expensive LEDs, where you know that the LED actually was going to stay around for a lot longer and it's going to be a lot cheaper to run. So, if you can bear that upfront cost of buying the more expensive LED, you're still in the long run, you're going to save money on your bills and you're going to save money on having to buy more light bulbs.
Right. So looking at that lifetime perspective. So that long lifetime, which is what we did here. We considered a 20-year lifetime, and we also considered something known as the social cost of carbon. And so this is essentially placing a dollar value on our carbon emissions in terms of how much we are emitting over time.
Yeah, and I think I hear that concept quite a bit, but I think it's pretty abstract. But I imagine it kind of relates to all of the costs associated with the negative impacts of climate change, right? We think of like the huge costs of things like Hurricane Katrina and these events that we know may be tied to some degree to climate change, what those negative impacts are and putting kind of a cost on that. Yeah.
So that's a great aspect to think about. So it might seem abstract by its nature, but the interagency, the working group on the social cost of carbon was a working group that got together under the Obama administration. So it consists of policymakers, scientists, researchers got together, and they used these models to actually develop, to put a price on essentially carbon emissions. So there's a social cost of carbon, there's a social cost of methane, and there's a few other aspects to the social cost of carbon. And it's actually been considered in federal government's, their cost-benefit analysis, looking at different types of technologies and systems. So while it might seem hypothetical, it's actually being applied throughout our nation currently.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Great.
And many different state governments are utilizing it as well.
Great. So I distracted a little bit from what you found in your research with asking all these background questions, but
oh no, that's okay.
Let's keep going there.
So we analyzed many different pathways and different scenarios as well. So in one of them, we found that the results of this analysis really show us that an immediate investment in a mature and currently available biomass-based diesel pathway would yield the highest net present value. So we're talking about the financial viability, those financial benefits.
So the best bang for the buck.
Yes, when we're considering the social cost of carbon. And it also accounted in one of our scenarios, it accounted for the second lowest total quantity of greenhouse gas emissions among our scenarios that we analyzed, among our 4 different scenarios that we analyzed.
So it performed really well on providing climate benefits.
Yes.
So great bang for the buck and great total kind of environmental outcome.
Yes. That's what one of our pathways, one of our scenarios showed.
I feel like this is one of those outcomes that without considering the economic side of thing, you might not see straightforward. At least in, environmental circles, people are thinking about things like electrification more than thinking about kind of our renewable fuel sector's kind of availability to help reduce emissions now. And so I think the research really brings to light why the kind of time value of carbon concept that you've explored here is such an important message. And one I think that we see is starting to resonate with fleets that are looking to decarbonize. I mean, in many of my circles around other environmental professionals, this concept is pretty well known. But I like to describe it to other people like it's like filling up a bathtub, right? So if we can slow the tap by taking action today, or even eventually turning it off, we can mitigate these impacts of the warming effects of greenhouse gas emissions in our atmosphere. And I think the work that you did to incorporate the carbon dioxide, our CO2 decay rate, including the social cost of carbon, these things kind of allowed me to take the calculations and make that estimation from the statement I kind of said up front that the 1 ton of carbon that we could avoid in year 1 turns into avoiding 13 tons of carbon in year 5 if we wait. And I think putting numbers on that concept has really helped with non-experts understanding the urgency more. And I think your research seems to do a very similar thing, giving the actual economic numbers, dollars and cents outcome. How do you kind of describe the time value of carbon concept to maybe your students or other people?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you, Veronica. So I teach an economics course, and it's specifically looking at energy. And I talk about this time value of carbon. And at first I ask, how do we describe what this is? And nobody, people are like, I've never even heard of that. So I think the first step is really getting students, as well as, everyone else who is interested in this, who can really make a difference, who wants to help out, understanding that timing is so important. It's essential for us to really mitigate these climate change impacts, mitigate, the worst climate change impacts that we will see if we don't take action now. So getting people to understand that there's a solution that's currently available, that's currently commercialized, that we can utilize now, and that won't take away from our other solutions. So when I'm thinking of the time value of carbon, I'm really thinking about that there's a benefit from reducing our carbon dioxide, from reducing those emissions immediately. And that we can do this, we can consider those benefits immediately, and then we can reassess 5-10 years down the line when other technologies become commercially available, when other technologies become more financially viable, and we can really reassess. Just because we're making one decision now, it doesn't mean we can't make further decisions down the road. We can't revise our decisions and aspects like that.
Right. Like it's not like all or nothing. It's not all in one bucket versus another bucket. It's not only considering time as a benefit to taking action, but time as a benefit to making decisions.
Right. Yes. Yeah. And that's what, a lot of my studies try to consider is, how does time play into our financial decisions? How does time play into our emissions outcomes as well?
This is the Better, Cleaner, Now podcast. Fascinating ideas and conversations in the world of biodiesel, renewable diesel, and sustainable aviation fuel.
Great. I'm Veronica Bradley, speaking today with Dr. Jenny Frank, the National Oil Heat Research Alliance Research Associate and Assistant Professor at State University of New York at Morrisville. So we're talking a bit about the time value of carbon. And, we often focus our fuels on transportation markets, but it's not just fleets, whether on the ground, in the water, or in the sky, that are taking advantage of our clean fuels. Clean fuels can make an impact also on the liquid fuel heating industry. And I know your work with NORA shines a light on the longevity of renewable fuels.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you, Veronica. One of our recent studies, it's not yet available to the public, but I would like to touch on a little bit about what we did with our net zero carbon case study. So this is with NORA. We really looked at what it means to decarbonize a home. So we're looking at it from a residential perspective.
Ooh, so, instead of thinking about, the trucks like we were talking about earlier, where, I personally don't own or drive a semi, but I do live in a home and most people do. So that's a great place to start, right? What can we do ourselves?
Yes. And that's really what we wanted to pursue with this study. We wanted to make it applicable to homeowners or those who are thinking about owning a home, those homeowners who are really concerned about their carbon footprint, concerned about their climate change impacts. So we looked at what it would take to achieve a net zero carbon home, and we incorporated a solar photovoltaic system for electricity generation as well as consumption. And we also incorporated a 100% biomass-based heating fuel.
So when you say you looked at consumption, does that mean you looked at like energy efficiency measures that a homeowner could take themselves to, make sure they're turning off the lights or something like that?
We more so looked at the solar PV system itself, and the homeowner, they didn't really make any changes to their consumption.
Oh, okay.
They were just going on like a business as usual approach.
Well, that's helpful because, trying to nudge people to change their habits is always hard.
Yeah. And I think that would be really interesting in the future, like a future study. But for this study, we just wanted to develop really like the baseline approach to see, your average homeowner, how would this impact them and their energy itself.
Great. And so is this research ongoing, or have you drawn any initial conclusions from it?
Yeah, we have some initial conclusions. So we really found that although there's really a significant energy load that was required by air conditioning in the summer, we found that integrating the solar PV system, it resulted in higher energy production than consumption values in the summer months.
Oh, wow.
And yeah.
So you could actually, like, you're producing more energy from your solar cell on your roof than you're actually even consuming with your air conditioning.
Yeah, that's what we're finding. And this is just, one home. So we're not going to like generalize it for many homes, but it's really a good start to understanding how we can reach our net zero goals from a residential perspective.
And so what role then did the B100 for home heating play? So I guess that would be more like the wintertime counterpart to the summertime.
Yes, exactly. So we wanted to utilize B100 as our heating fuel. And what we ended up doing is we replaced current petroleum-based heating fuels with our B100. So essentially, we wanted to incorporate this fuel to understand the impact that it has on our goal of achieving really net zero throughout the home itself. So we found that for a majority of the months, we were really relying more so on these renewable energy technologies and this B100 fuel than we were on really anything else. And it really demonstrated the technical and the financial feasibility of developing this net zero carbon home through the utilization of our 100% biomass-based liquid fuel, as well as our solar PV system. And this is for a home, a residency located in New York State.
So I'm hearing we don't need petroleum from this study, that it's not only reasonable to have this goal, environmentally, but that the financial side of it is really feasible. And, you're using technologies that are available today to create that system.
Yes, we're utilizing currently commercialized, currently available technologies and fuels that, the homeowner can purchase today.
That is incredible. So commercially available, totally ready to take on the world, basically. What challenges are you seeing for the industry, specifically for the home heating oil industry, that has to get addressed to really get this deployed across all of New York?
Yeah, I think one challenge, especially in the residential sector that I'm seeing, is homeowners who have been utilizing their fossil fuels, if it's petroleum-based heating oil or other types of fossil fuels. They're kind of, not everyone, but, homeowners are, some of them are in this mindset where it's like, if it's not broken, why am I going to fix it? Why am I going to move into a different fuel, into a different direction where everything else is operating fine? My home is being heated, I have electricity, everything is fine, but why go in another route or another direction if I don't have to?
Sure. I mean, it sounds like, though, that your research can really kind of at least take one of the considerations off the table of whether it's really financially feasible and whether the benefits are truly there, right?
Yeah, and whether the benefits outweigh the costs, which, a lot of my research is showing that the benefits significantly do outweigh the costs.
So we need to take this research and spread it. We need to fan it out across all of the people, so to make sure that everybody knows that like this is totally doable, and even if there are concerns about change, that we should really embrace them, because we can benefit wholly from making these changes, right?
Yes, and it's not just our current generation that will benefit; it's future generations as well that will really reap these benefits. So
do it for your kids, for your grandkids.
Yeah. If we make these changes now, they'll impact future generations. Future generations will see them.
Yeah. So you say, just kind of the adversity to change. Are there any other kind of challenges that you see?
I think, and I'm really trying to rectify this in a lot of my classes, is just getting the education out there that these different technologies, different fuels make an impact. And here's what some of their impacts are. Here are some of the financial impacts. Here are some of the environmental impacts. And just educating people on the benefits and some of the challenges as well. I think education is going to be a necessity if we want people to transition away from fossil fuels.
Yeah, I know. And I don't know if it's true for your students, but I know, my undergrad degree was environmental science, and you kind of grow up in this circle of thinking. And I think, the kind of the elephant in the room for the whole clean fuels industry is electrification. And I think it's something that, often in environmental circles is just, well, this is the answer. This is how we actually get to net zero. And I don't think folks necessarily appreciate, even for places and markets where electrification is commercially and financially viable, how much time that transition is going to take for that market. I think so. I used to work in the airline industry, and an airplane in the US right now, the average lifespan for a US aircraft is say 15 years. But when a U.S. airline sells that aircraft, it's not like it goes to the graveyard. It goes and it's sold to an airline in another country. So that airplane is around for decades. And so even if you were to create an electric aircraft today, well, it's going to take 30 years from today if everybody buys the electric aircraft to be able to not rely on any sort of liquid fuel. I'm wondering then, do you think it's viable to get people to make that change? Like the education is so key, but how do we get folks who aren't on like social media where so many things, get spread? Like, how do we reach in and get the changes at those last kind of people on the margins, if you will?
Yeah, and I think that's a great question to consider. And honestly, I don't have a great answer for you. I think, like I said before, I think education is going to be key. I think having maybe even setting the example, here's what we've done. So for instance, this case study, here's what we've done. Here's how we are achieving a net zero carbon concept for the residential sector. And here's what you can do as a homeowner. Here's what you can do as a business owner who, has a building or has a storefront. So really setting that example and showing people their financial options, showing them different types of grant initiatives, different types of rebate programs that exist today, and then helping them get there.
Great. So it sounds like, bottom line, clean fuels, including biodiesel, renewable diesel, and sustainable aviation fuel and bioheat, can slow the accumulation of carbon in our atmosphere, push back against the detrimental effects of climate change today, and can do it financially reasonably. Yeah. So the sooner we can take action to mitigate the emissions, the greater the positive impact we can have on the environment. So Jenny, where can listeners learn more about your research and more about how to switch from petroleum heating oil to bioheat?
Yeah, that's a great question, Veronica. So I have some publications, some published research in the journal, the peer-reviewed journal called Fuel, as well as the peer-reviewed journal called Fuel Communications.
Great names.
And
simple, easy to remember.
Yeah, very simple. As well as BioFPR. Those are really three journals and there's some other journals out there as well, but those are really three key journals.
Highly reputable.
Yes, Yes, and this is all peer-reviewed publications, so that means we had to go through the peer-reviewed process in order to get them published.
That's great. And so then is NORA's website also a good place to find more info?
Yes, definitely. So noraweb.org, O-R-G.
Great. Thank you, Jenny. And I will say, for anyone who is a glutton for this kind of information, nerding out on research and analysis, Clean Fuels will be hosting its 2024 Sustainability Workshop in Kansas City, March 11 to 13. We're really excited to share research and analysis like Jenny's with the wider audience and really move the needle on kind of the evidence and support for the clean fuels industry.
And Veronica, can you just give me a brief preview of what we'll be talking about?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Love this. So, I mean, you do more of the actual number crunching on the economic side of things, but we focus at the sustainability workshop and on furthering kind of the environmental value, the things like carbon intensity that gets incorporated into policy to help our fuels compete, as well as driving kind of market demand through kind of corporate accounting and those corporate goals, kind of how biofuels can support and help companies reach their own targets. So we're going to be talking all about the different carbon intensity methodologies in the various fuels programs. We're going to be talking about ways to technologically reduce carbon intensity. Crop-based fuels like soy and canola are a huge part of our industry, so we're going to focus a bit on those specific feedstocks and some of the pernicious issues around indirect effects that get talked about in the policy space, as well as on the corporate side, some of the nuances of accounting for greenhouse gas emissions. So kind of a quantification celebration, if you will, of the ways that we figure all of this out to support the industry.
That's awesome. I can't wait to attend. And where can I find more information?
Oh, yeah. Well, I think the easiest way, we don't have a simple website like NORA, but if folks simply Google Clean Fuels Sustainability Workshop, or if you go to the Clean Fuels website, cleanfuels.org, then you can kind of click through there to get to the registration page to learn more about the workshop and to see the agenda. But thank you again, Jenny, for taking the time to sit down with me today. It's really been a pleasure.
Thank you, Veronica, for having me.
And thank you all for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And join us next week for another episode of the Better, Cleaner Now podcast.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. To catch all the latest from Clean Fuels Alliance America, follow us at cleanfuels.org. The Better, Cleaner Now podcast is a production of Clean Fuels Alliance America. That's all for us. Now it's your turn to be better, cleaner now.